Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week, the Senate Judiciary Committee was busy. We met for over 30 hours to consider the nomination of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to fill a vacancy on the Supreme Court. During the meeting of the committee, hundreds of questions were posed to Judge Jackson. She spoke thoughtfully and at length about her years in public service, and most importantly, she really imparted to the committee and to America as it watched what she thought about this great nation, her pride in being an American, the opportunities which were given to her, and opportunities which she used to make this a better place for many. I was one of the millions who came away from last week's hearing deeply impressed with Judge Jackson. It proved to me, and during the course of her testimony, that the words over the steps of the Supreme Court, equal justice under law, is a personal challenge and an invitation to a person just like Judge Jackson. But it appears some of our Republican colleagues are more reluctant to support her at this moment. She's still making the rounds. Over 50 senators have received personal visits, and even more will during the course of this week. They have reservations, and I've spoken to some of them and listened to their statements. They say that they don't have any question about her qualifications or experience. Well, thank goodness. She has a stellar resume. Anyone who's a lawyer in this nation would look at it with envy to think what she has achieved against the odds in her life. Unfortunately, some of the members of the committee misrepresented her record on several issues, and I'd like to try to set it straight at this moment. There seems to be this passion among some Republicans to get this nominee to state in a word or two her judicial philosophy. I find that interesting. If a person came up to one of my colleagues and said, "What is your political philosophy?" there are a number of things a person might say. They might say, for example, "I'm a fiscal conservative." And you might then ask, well, then why did you vote for the Trump tax cuts that gave tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans and added almost $2 trillion to the national debt? And if you're a fiscal conservative, why is it that you only preach for a balanced budget amendment when there's a Democrat in the White House, never when there's a Republican? Basically what you're saying is, I can hear you and your declaration, but I want to know what you've done. When it comes to Judge Jackson, those who seek her judicial philosophy and want a simple label, one way or the other, just haven't done their homework. She has almost 600 published opinions. This woman, this jurist, is not held back in explaining in case after case how she views the law. It's there for the reading. Every member of the Senate and the public have access to that information to get the true measure of a judicial philosophy. What she said over and over again at the hearing was, "I believe in judicial restraint." I think that's exactly what we need in a judge, personally. That's exactly what you'll find with you when you review the hundreds of opinions that she has written to date. Then there is this litmus test question, and it meant so much to Senator McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate. He led off his opposition to Judge Jackson on the issue. And the issue, quite simply, is whether or not Judge Jackson is willing to say what her position is on increasing the number of justices serving on the Supreme Court. Interesting question. Most Americans think it's been 9 for all time, but that's not true. I believe it was in 1869 that number was established. Before then, it was a fewer number of justices. It hasn't been changed since. There's speculation among some political quarters that people are thinking about changing in the future. So when it came to Senator McConnell's opposition to Judge Jackson, because she said it's a policy matter to be decided by Congress, not to be decided by the court, as to the composition and number on the Supreme Court, Senator McConnell went on to say that disqualified her. That was the leading disqualification. Well, you might ask Senator McConnell, how did the previous nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, whom you went to great lengths maintaining a vacancy on the court so that a Republican judge could fill the vacancy, how did she answer this probing threshold question when it came to the future composition of the Supreme Court? She said virtually exactly what Judge Jackson said. It's a matter for Congress to decide, not for the courts. That was an acceptable answer with Amy Coney Barrett, But for Senator McConnell, it's an unacceptable answer when it comes to Judge Jackson. The other questions that were raised were about her legal representation. Those of us who practice law understand that you don't necessarily agree with the legal position of every client who walks in the office, and sometimes you have no choice. If the court appoints you as a defender or as an attorney to represent someone who's an indigent client, you often have a client before you who's not necessarily a savory character and might have some questionable background. Your job is to be a zealous advocate for that client, but never to lie to the court. Stick with the truth. Do your best. Represent them in the course of litigation. That's what Judge Jackson has done in her private practice in her years working for the federal public defender. Most attorneys get it. Most of them understand that that client you're representing is not necessarily espousing your point of view, nor really boasting of a lifestyle that you admire. But you have a professional obligation to do your best as a lawyer to represent them before the court of law. Some of them were opposed to Judge Jackson because she represented detainees at Guantanamo Bay. That's curious because these same lawmakers once claimed that judicial nominees should not be held accountable for the views and actions of their clients. It was the junior senator from Missouri who not that long ago argued, and I quote, "do not necessarily share the views of the people they represent, but must represent them effectively and fairly." He was right then, and he ought to remember it now. Or consider the words of the junior senator from Texas who told us in September of 2019, quote, "saying that the views of your clients or the positions of your clients are necessarily your own personal views is no more accurate than saying a criminal defense lawyer who represents capital defendants is advancing the cause of murder." End of quote from the junior senator from Texas. Finally, some of our Republican colleagues have accused Judge Jackson of being soft on crime. We had an interesting panel the last day when we considered the judge, and on that panel was a gentleman who's the president of the black law enforcement organization known as Noble. And I asked him point blank, we know that the Fraternal Order of Police have endorsed Judge Jackson's aspiration to the court. We know that the International Association of Chiefs of Police also endorse her. You, Noble, representing black law enforcement agents across the nation, have endorsed her. Would you or any of these organizations have even considered the endorsement if you thought she was soft on crime or wanted to defund the police? He was unequivocal. No, we wouldn't have considered her. But her critics ignore that reality. And I want to make it clear that any senator considering her nomination has the right to make their own choice in this process. They can also look beyond the fact that she comes from a law enforcement family to her actual decision-making and sentencing. But to claim, as a few have, only a few, that somehow Judge Jackson was soft when it came to child predators or endangering children is just inaccurate and frankly insulting. Look at the facts. Judge Jackson is well within the judicial mainstream of 70 to 80% of federal judges when it comes to child pornography offenders. Not out of the mainstream, in it. And she's put many behind bars for decades. Her approach to these cases is comparable to that of many of President Trump's nominees on the bench today. Independent fact checkers have exposed these baseless attacks for what they are. I can't say it any better than the conservative federal prosecutor who wrote in a conservative magazine, the National Review, that this line of attack against Judge Jackson is, quote, meritless to the point of demagoguery, end of quote. Let's be clear, none, absolutely none of the attacks that have been leveled against Judge Jackson stand up to scrutiny. I assume that's why only a few of my Republican colleagues have spoken out in support of them. So I want to thank the majority of Republican Judiciary Committee members who treated last week's hearing with dignity and respect. They posed challenging, probing questions to Judge Jackson, and that was their responsibility to do so. Judge Jackson's forthright responses showed the American public why she deserves this historic opportunity. She is a brilliant jurist, even-handed, with a model temperament. There were so many moments, for those who followed the hearing, they know what I'm speaking of, when I looked up and saw her sitting at the table thinking she could stand up at this very moment and say, enough, my family and I are leaving. But she didn't. She had the strength and the grace and the dignity and determination to weather even that political firestorm. I'm honored to support Judge Jackson. I look forward to our Judiciary Committee vote on her nomination next Monday.